Continuing You Can Change the World, The Christopher Approach by James Keller. We are starting Chapter 3, Purpose Makes the Difference. To the glory of God alone. Such was the inspiring dedication which John Sebastian Bach, one of the greatest composers of all time, gave to each of the works which came from his generous heart and gifted pen. For 27 years he served as director of music at a church in Leipzig, Germany. If he had taken this post simply to earn a living or to make a name for himself, he would have lived and died unknown, like so many of those who have no interest outside themselves. At best, he would have been forgotten, good though his life may have been in its own small way. But filled as he was with the love of God and his fellow man, Bach had only one ambition. That was to serve as an instrument, however unworthy, to reflect the glory of the Most High into the lives of as many of God's children as he could.
Well, there's that reference in the New Testament about the children of God and the children of Satan or something, right? So we know we're not supposed to take it literally. It's,
Little did he dream that because of the inspiring objective he was to draw out of himself, a power of composition of such exquisite beauty that, instead of reaching only a few in Leipzig or Germany, he would reach the world and generations then unborn, and to millions over the earth he would bring, through his magnificent cantatas and oratories, a fleeting glimpse of the majesty of the Creator of all. That was his purpose, his motivation, to love God above all else, and to love his neighbor, because he saw in him the image of the Almighty. Bach's whole life was a demonstration of the power of Christian love, and not a few people have recognized that. But, strangely enough, one of the greatest testimonials to the efficacy of that power came not from a historian, a feature writer, or an ecclesiastic, but from Anatol Notkarsky, former Commissar of Education in the USSR. We hate Christianity and Christians, this communist proclaimed in 1935. Even the best of them must be considered our worst enemies. They preach love of one's neighbor and mercy, which is contrary to our principles. Christian love is an obstacle to the development of the revolution. Down with love of our neighbor. What we want is hatred. We must know how to hate. Only thus will we conquer the universe, quoted in Izvestia. Note well the significance of that statement. Christian love is an obstacle to the development of the revolution. It illustrates, as much as words possibly can, the undeniable fact that only those with a burning love or a burning hatred have a cause that is greater than themselves. They alone can change the world for better or for worse. The in-betweeners accomplish little or nothing. For those that live only for themselves, even Christ himself has a small regard. I would that thou wert cold or hot, but because thou art lukewarm, and neither cold nor hot, I will begin to vomit thee out of my mouth.
Apocalypse 3:15.
Each of us has to have a sense of dedication, a sense of sacrifice that will go beyond ourselves. That the godless realize this, even if too many God-fearing do not. It is further emphasized by an editorial which appeared in a communist paper a few years ago. Men and women work for a principle on the daily worker. It reads, their salaries are not large, We deeply appreciate that our editors and columnists make real sacrifices, and that most of them could find ready employment elsewhere on the basis of their ability alone, and certainly be paid far more than on the daily worker, especially if they would repudiate their principles. More than anything else, this devotion to a cause, instilled so deeply into their followers, accounts for untiring zeal of the disciples of Nazism, fascism, and now communism. They took it from early Christianity, but they have brought it up to date, streamlined it, and modernized it. Well, we knew the dangers of the USSR before
We did of the NSDAP, didn't we?
Motivated by love of God and of our fellow man, we must take that zeal with credit to the godless. For, as Christ said, as the Lord commended the unjust steward, inasmuch as he had done wisely. For the children of this world are wiser in their generation than the children of light. Luke 16:8. If those who spread confusion have found in a method borrowed from Christianity a spirit of purpose, we have not the slightest excuse for neglecting that method a day longer. In every home, church, and school, in business, government, education, and the writing fields, our people must constantly be inspired to play a personal part as missionaries in changing the world for the better. And in doing this, not only will the inspiration touch the best that is in them and strike a responsive chord, but it will render a tremendous service to humanity. The genuineness and sincerity of our love of people is not measured by academic attitudes, by passing resolutions, by meeting once a month and complaining about conditions in the world, and then coming back a month or later to complain and some more. Mere lip service is almost the equivalent of nothing at all. Paul's driving purpose. To love thy neighbor as thyself means doing for others as we would do for ourselves, regardless of the time spent, inconvenience involved, even real suffering itself, sometimes endured. In this, we might well take to heart the example of the Apostle Paul. Few in history have been driven more by this purpose than was he. Literally and figuratively, he was consumed with the burning desire to share his love of Christ with anyone and everyone. One of the most striking instances of his tender solicitude and how tactfully considerate he could be in his approach is eloquently evident in an account of an experience he had in Greece. While waiting in Athens for his co-workers to join him, no one would have blamed him if he had taken time off to rest, since he planned to be there only a few days. Yet he did nothing of the kind, because to give way to his comfort would have been to think only of himself. He felt an obligation to the Athenians, and as the scripture narrates, his heart was moved within him to find the city so much given over to idolatry. Acts 17:16. Now we find that the earliest manuscripts of the book of Acts come from the 120s of the Common Era, as does the book of, is it Matthew or is it Luke? I think it's Luke. That was the second one to have manuscripts. Even though it could be only a passing effort, he decided not to remain aloof, making his way to the business center, to the marketplace, where he would come in direct contact with the men of Athens. He began to strike up conversations with all whom he met. They regarded him as a meddler, but that didn't bother him, for he was used to such a reception. One with the loving purpose which inflamed Paul pays little heed to any expression of disdain or contempt. He kept moving deeper and deeper into their midst until they had to pay attention to him. Finally, they decided to give him a public hearing and invited him to the Areopagus. His opening words reveal the loving heart and the soul of Paul. They were a masterpiece of tender regard for others who had beliefs very much opposed to his own, yet show that in no way did he compromise with them. One with less tact or less farsightedness could easily have upbraided them for being given over to idolatry, but not Paul. Well, because he was preaching polytheism himself, right? From the very start, he wins them by saying, "Men of Athens, wherever I look, I find you scrupulously religious." Referring to the idols which adorn the temple. Then quickly he gets to the point with another aftermark, which distinguishes, yet neither cuts nor hurts, noticing one altar not erected to any god in particular, but rather serving the purpose of being useful for new gods, or for whom no other altar could be found. Paul continues, "And examining your monuments, as I passed by them, I found, among others, an altar which bore the inscription, 'To the unknown God.' It is this unknown object of your devotion that I am revealing to you, the God who made the world and all that is in it. That God who is Lord of heaven and earth does not dwell in temples that our hands have made. It is He who gives to all of us life and breath and all we have. It is He who has made of one single stock all the nations that were to dwell over the whole face of the earth." He adds still another expression of his love for these men of Athens. So intent is he on emphasizing similarities, not differences. After saying, "He is not far from any of us. It is in Him that we live and move and have our being," he concludes with the reminder that some among them have already said that very thing. "Some of your poets have told us," he says, "for we are His children." The aim of every Christopher. It should be the constant goal of every Christopher to follow this pattern of approach laid down by Paul. In the first recorded talk on Christianity given in Europe, in the 11 sentences that make up his brief address, are numerous lessons from which we can profit, but 3 in particular have a special meaning for one who is a bearer of Christ. 1. The whole of Paul's motivation was love of the Athenians. Even though they were given over to idolatry, he felt that the love of Christ belonged to them as much as to himself. It was his job to adapt himself to them, not to expect them to conform to him. He strove hard not to offend. He was not merely trying to prove how wrong they were and how right he was. He was not out to beat them down, nor to hurt them in any way. On the contrary, he went to extraordinary lengths to single out every possible point of agreement. He went to them. He did not wait for them to come to him. Anyone who has a true love of people would do just that. Another simple truth Paul stressed was the existence of a personal God who was spoken to the world and on whom the world depends. That is the one immutable truth a Christopher who is steeped in a genuine love of people will strive incessantly to bring to all men. It is the truth upon which mankind must base all hope for a better world. It is the truth that the founders of our country reverently and repeatedly affirmed in the Declaration of Independence. In stressing this one truth, Paul did not intimate this was all of religion, but he did lay down the most emphatically, though so simply, the fact that this was the one cornerstone upon which all else depends, and it is this cornerstone that all forms of materialism and totalitarianism relentlessly oppose and seek to destroy. Therefore, it should be one truth above all others that a Christopher strives to carry into every phase of public and private life. While Paul made very few converts from this talk, only Dionysius Damaris, and others with them. He was primarily interested in doing far more than winning a handful of followers. He didn't measure success by the number who went the full way with him. He was out to reach everybody, no matter how they received his message. He was doing exactly what Christ commanded. He was going to all men, into the highways as well as the byways, and he knew full well that he was planting seeds which would blossom later, that he was leavening the multitude, that because they had taken the trouble to go into the marketplace of Athens as the first Christ-bearer to enter there, he had brought countless numbers at least one step closer to Christ. The true Christopher, motivated by love of all people for love of God, is continually trying to reach the many, not merely the few, the multitude, not merely a single individual. And that is why, like Paul, a Christ-bearer goes where people are, into the marketplaces, into the four great spheres that vitally influence, for better or worse, the great mass of humanity. He goes into the educational field, government, labor management relations, the writing field, press, radio, television, motion pictures, books, and magazines. In other words, the Christopher gets out of his own little world and into the big world, a world which will be run either by those who hate Christ, or who know him not, or by those who dedicate themselves to bringing mankind back to the way, the truth, and the life. Well, the Bible kind of shows some differences between the way of Jesus and the way of Paul and company. I think that needs to be addressed. Every Christopher recognizes that fact. In their own perverted way, so do the godless. The in-betweeners apparently do not. Those otherwise good people who, because of their apathy, are making a negligible impact on the basic problems that convulse our nation and the world. They pretend to be so absorbed in saving their own souls as to justify giving scarcely a passing thought to the salvation of their neighbors. They are solicitous for everything concerning their own personal security, but seldom lift a finger in behalf of the economic security of the hundreds of millions all over the earth who often turn in desperation as their only hope of securing social justice to those who champion violence and even death. Everyone should have a reasonable interest in good housing, good food, good clothing, and other personal advantages. The in-betweeners, however, so distort this interest that they rarely get beyond taking care of themselves. Rarely do they devote time and energy to providing the personal leadership now so urgently needed to win for the great masses of mankind. Not convenience or luxuries, but the bare necessities of life, which God intends as their minimum right. There's more than ever, there's an overabundance of resources. And we find that for a little bit of luxury, there's a large amount of people not being provided for and resources being wasted to provide for that. That's why some of these things are happening. The overemphasis on self. Parents, directors, and teachers too often are so preoccupied with protecting the young that they overemphasize self-preservation, self-sanctification, self-development, and self-enjoyment. Without intending any harm, they give their children the impression that they have only one mission in life, to take care of themselves. Little do they realize this is only part of Christianity, that by failing to pass on the fullness of Christ's message, they are clipping the wings of their own youngsters, fencing them in, depriving them of the more abundant and interesting life that God meant them to have. And, in many instances, they are heading for the monotony, the frustration, even the tragedy, which is the inevitable result of concentration on self. Now, the difference between the Christopher and the Luciferian is the Luciferian is developing their own
power. They're bringing out their own light. Not necessarily that they're, some selfish jerk or something like this, like it makes it sound. But they experience the mythology. It's not a vicarious reliance. I turn to this and therefore, no, they bring out their own hero deeds, as it's called. More often than not, they go through life hitting only on 1 or 2 cylinders, which they could be driving ahead on all 8. They go through the years leading a drab, dull, even if harmless existence, scarcely conscious that they have buried the talents God has given them. They live and die, never once realizing that Christ did not say to love God and self only. That is a primary and essential foundation, to be sure, but is only part of Christianity. The fullness of Christianity is to love others, all men. How much? Christ's standard admits of no evasion. As thyself, the attitude of God and myself, therefore is not enough. It must be God, myself, and everybody else. The tragic story of Germany, when the NSDAP first began to come into power, cannot be retold too often. If the good German people had followed that admonition of Christ and thought as much of others as they did of themselves, Hitler would never have succeeded in seizing power. Well, the NSDAP probably would have accomplished the same thing without Hitler. They might not have been as artistic. Maybe that made a difference, but, But too few good folk wanted to be bothered with teaching because there was not much money in it. There was no glamour attached to the profession, and it called for hard work. They didn't want to go into government because the salaries were low, and in thousands of inconspicuous posts, the routine tasks were dull and uninteresting toward all other vital spheres that touched the lives of every person in their country. They had the same attitude. From a worldly point of view, such jobs did not pay off. Now, say they didn't pay off. Well, things pay off in different ways, right? But the NSDAP sprouted out of the German Christian movement. That flag with the swastika that we're familiar with. The variations on that, again, were part of the German Christian movement. Of course, all good Germans want a good education, good government, good relations between management and labor, good healthy writing in their newspapers, magazines, books, radio, and movies. But, like the people described by the phrase, everybody wants to eat, but nobody wants to cook, they just couldn't be bothered. As their apathy continued, so did the virus of totalitarianism continue to spread. In Austria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and other countries, the story was the same. The way was made easy for the disciples of hate, since they went in as wolves in sheep's clothing. Their interest in social and economic problems, nowadays we call that social justice warriors, could not readily be detected as sheer hypocrisy by the poor, desperate people. In the name of Hitler, now Stalin, they promised better homes, more food, finer schools, bigger salaries, and improved working conditions. Again, the average people were fooled. These men must be good, they concluded. They promised so much. They could not foresee that this was merely the bait, hiding the hook of enslavement, that the totalitarians had not the slightest intention of seeing that their promises were fulfilled. Now, that there was a glamour in the fact of the mythological engagement, and you take that away from society, you kind of risk the wrong people bringing it back. An object lesson in self-deception, perhaps. The fact still remains, however, that the secret of totalitarian success stemmed from just one thing: the forces of evil and hatred went to the people with their false gospels, while those who knew better remained aloof, keeping the truth to themselves. If just a small percentage of good people had possessed the ambition and courage to leave the narrow circle of their lives and work for the light instead of leaving the field to those in the darkness, The whole course of history might have been changed. Where Europe failed, however, we can succeed. For us, there is still hope, a refreshing hope, that it will not take much to rectify and remove the major ills that still plague mankind. And this can be done without tearing down or destroying anything. All that is necessary is to extend, to continue, to develop in each individual that fullness of true love, not only for God and self, but for others as well, that Christ laid down as the indispensable foundation of lasting peace. Moreover, it can be done quickly, because this purpose taps a force for good that is deep within every human heart, a force that is ready and waiting to plunge in a practical, timely way into action capable of overcoming every obstacle. There are numerous places to practice and perfect this love of others. One of the best places to start is the home, especially when circumstances are difficult, perhaps even seemingly hopeless. Such action, Christopher action, will arrest much of the divorce, the juvenile delinquency, the general breakdown of morale that is creeping steadily into millions of homes as love of one another diminishes and the spirit of every man for himself begins to dominate with tragic results. Well, nowadays we tend to call that the psychopath, right? The person that justifies, well, just for me. Well, that's kind of a definition of a psychopath, and by distinguishing between the and the Luciferian that brings out, that brings out a light, isn't the that brings a light is not the same thing as a psychopath or a sociopath. According to a recent newspaper reporting, quoting, a responsible government medical authority, at least 8 million people in this country suffer some form of mental sickness, and another 10 million now living will spend some part of their lives under mental care. The report goes on to say that these tragedies are symptoms of human personal crises in the lives of millions of little frustrated people whose daily paths are concentric circles. Sometimes these tensions appear near the surface, reflected in quiet desperation, in accumulated failures, frustration, and worry. But in numerous other instances, they break out violently, like flames from a smoldering pile of rubbish. To verify this, you have only to pick up the daily newspapers and read the headlines of those extreme cases which are becoming more and more prevalent. Torture suspect confesses. Mother stabs infant to death. Despondent couple leap from bridge. In all these cases, the background is the same. These are the unhappy mortals who are sick of their jobs, sick of their families and friends, sick of their very lives. Yet, the happy hope in all this dark picture is that millions of Americans who are on the brink of mental and emotional disaster can be guided toward self-salvation simply by convincing them to wake up and live, and to use to the utmost the fullness of their lives, which God intended to be their due, to get out of themselves and the real or imagined troubles by helping others to help themselves. Now, sometimes the last part's not part of it, but you save yourself, right? Your universal things that you're supposed to do, and your personal things you're supposed to do, is how you achieve your due. Relatively little of it is given to you just by being lazy or something. I guess you can still breathe or something, but with certain sicknesses or something, maybe not. Maybe you do have to make the effort. One mother instilled this love of a neighbor into her children, in season and out. But she went further. In her last will and testament, she left far more than her worldly possessions. She bequeathed to them a priceless legacy that well sums up the Christ-like objective of her life. Love one another, hold fast to that, whether you understand one another or not. And remember, nothing really matters except loving God and others over the whole world as far as you can reach. Now, I would say that fear, hope, and hate are proper motivations that you should probably blend in there too, and personal pleasure or sense of accomplishment or something. But true love knows no boundaries. It is of the essence of true love of others that it seeks to diffuse itself, that it knows no boundaries, that it stirs you to share it and spread it over the world as far as you can reach. It is this all-inclusive love that sustains and furnishes the driving power for one who wishes to be a lifetime Christopher. It is a constant reminder that the world itself will be better off because he or she has lived in it. True love of others is the encouraging reminder to the Christ-bearer that he or she is working on the side of the fundamental goodness which the Creator of all has embedded deep in the heart and soul of each and every human being. Now, if you refer to the Christs and the Messiahs in the Bible, and ones that make their list in the Bible, you do get that idea is that there's a side that we're supposed to, bring out, right? But it's not quite in the Christian sense, is it? The most hateful man in the world wants to be loved. The worst criminal often takes great pains to appear as a respectable citizen, insisting that others be honest with him. The most immoral of men cautiously guards the dignity of his wife and children. No matter to what lengths people go to root out of their fellow men that sense of decency which distinguishes man from the brute animal, they never completely succeed. Some remnants always remain, awaiting development. There is always hope, even in the worst of men.